Go. Watch this. Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is March 6, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. And today's special guest is Joel Thome. Where are you calling in from, Joel?
Hey, calling in from New York City, Manhattan.
How cool is that? What's the first question? What's the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being, love.
I get that answer a lot. I agree with you. What's your favorite form of information? How information comes into you?
Meditation.
Oh my God, that's a good answer. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
In order to hone the collective consciousness.
Man, you must have ESP. We're going to get into that word. But first, Joel, do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented by humans?
I think it's a process of life because we are always connecting with streams of information. For instance, I had a dream the other night, and in the dream, I was listening to a lecture by Julian Jaynes. And in that lecture, he said, the roots of consciousness reside in the evolution of the bicameral mind. So I think we are constantly absorbing information through the bicameral mind. Left brain, right brain, intuition, intellect, divine reception, and transmission.
Dude, you're talking all the things we study daily, man. You're on the right beam. And in the easy way is you don't need no stinking book. You can dream that stuff.
Well, that's just the fortunate part.
Yeah, well, you probably read it first and then you dreamt it, but it still sounded good as it came through a dream. Joel,
Well, that virtual dream.
That was a what dream?
Virtual dream.
Oh, a virtual dream. Yeah.
Yes. That's the way my music comes.
That's how your music comes. Yeah. Well, we're going to get into that too. Do thoughts create emotions?
Yes.
I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
Well, somebody once said that we are born with what we need, with all we need. We just have to sharpen our reception to be able to absorb what we're already given and what's already there. Sometimes you meet a person who has such a gift, such wonderful intelligence, that they're a ray of light, and it comes from within because they have done the work to hone and sharpen that reception.
Joe, I'll take that as I don't know what I think until I've sharpened my reception.
Yes, well, have to have the tools to be able to receive the light that is around us, coming into our consciousness and rising up out of our consciousness. It's a thought of Sri Aurobindo, which I really love. the ascent of consciousness.
Beautiful. Let the light that's inside you shine. Okay,
Yeah.
Joel, tackle this one. Can humans think without language?
Also, yes. But the language may come in the form of music. It may come in the form of poetry. The language may come in the form of a painting or of a vision. Language is also an extremely subtle, beautiful phenomena. For instance, I myself think in various languages at different times, and sometimes it's a little bit difficult to shift from one thought I'm thinking in one language to another language. But I think art is a language. Poetry is a language. Music is a language. We are constantly surrounded by language of various kinds. It doesn't have to be words.
Right. You're juggling these all really well, Joel. But what's more fundamental, music or language?
I think music is a language.
Yeah.
In our daily exchange with other humans and other beings, we do that in the form of linguistic models. But linguistics also apply to music in a holistic sense. If one is chanting, say, in Sanskrit, in the language of Sanskrit, every word of Sanskrit is so precise that it carries a vibration. So that's why pronunciation in certain music and certain words is so vitally important. The pronunciation has to be exact in Sanskrit for it to work internally.
That is beautiful. I got a good education at the University of Michigan, but I do know how to mispronunciate well.
I know how to pronounce because I was born in Detroit. I was raised in Pontiac. So I'm well acquainted with the University of Michigan. Great place.
Yeah, we're Michiganders. But you know, Noam Chomsky, he said language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Joel, what do you do when language breaks down? When language doesn't work, what do you do?
That is a fundamental world problem. It's global now. Not that so much that the language has broken down, but communication has broken down. I love Noam Chomsky, and Chomsky always puts it in the most articulate way, just as you did right now.
Well, I just read his quote, but I'm just saying when communication breaks down, when language doesn't work, what do you do? What's your strategy? What's your master plan when language and communication break down?
I keep trying to evolve internally in a way that I can improve my own communication and ask myself, well, how can I better communicate with this individual even if we totally disagree? How can we better communicate? And I think love, I'm waxing poetic, but love is such a powerful building bridge builder. And I do believe in creating bridges and holding hands.
I like that answer. That's like a guy said the other week, he says, what do you do when language breaks down? He says, group hug. Well, hold hands and have a group hug.
Yes, yes.
Joel, your observations of humans, are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings? I know you can't separate it, but we invented the words. Your observation.
I think that unfortunately humans are often non-thinking beings. In a way, many animals have much more feeling, but we are capable of feeling and capable of creating. As long as the creative consciousness is there, we can share feelings of love and perception and communication.
Wow, you're smart, Joel. I'm learning a lot. I appreciate this. These are two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Well, what a beautiful thing to say. It's certainly related. It's interrelated. Thinking without a soul is called stupidity. Soul without thinking is called ignorance.
It's beautiful. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
That is a big question right now. I love that question. AI tells us that that machines can interact on a mechanical level and on an electronic level, and of course on a digital level. But thinking is, as you just said so beautifully, is related to the soul, or it was implicit in your question.
Yeah, you handle these well, because most people go, well, it depends on what the soul is. And then can machines think? Well, it depends on what you think thinking is. Okay, onward and upward, Joel. Do you more pursue meaning or more pursue happiness?
Inner meaning and evolution of consciousness. And happiness comes from that. Happiness is also related to interaction, communicating like we're doing now. For me, that is happiness. It's joy, it's bliss. It's communication on a much higher level, spiritual level.
Yeah, I'm as happy as I was in the first row at Zappa's Universe 29 years ago with you conducting.
Oh, boy, thank you so much. I remember you so beautifully in that role. And every time I get a chance to see that video, I see you. You brought happiness to the whole crowd just watching your own joy. And you put in so much work into that whole experience. That's why it became such a joyful experience, because we had you and the Zappa fans and so many people that came from all over just to experience that with us. It was a group communication. It was joint collective consciousness on a very high level.
Well, dude, we got to give a shout out to Frank Zappa and the whole community and camaraderie he created. We call them Zapatistas.
Oh yes, well, Batista's great.
Zapatista. But you've been anticipating all the questions, man. You have ESP, Joel. Does the brain, does the mind, does the human more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
My belief is that consciousness exists. In fact, I want to give you a very, very good example of that, and a way of directing my response to your question like this. Jonas Salk and I were very close friends, and Jonas was extremely wise. At one point, I was offered the head of the department to be the head of the Department of Music at Carnegie Mellon and create a 21st century department. I didn't realize they were talking about 21st century BC until I got there. So we were talking about 21st century AD. They were talking about 21st century BC. So Jonas and I were talking, and I asked him what he thought we could do together to collaborate if I took this position. The first thing he said was, the first thing is don't go to Pittsburgh. The second thing he said is we could create an institute for the study of creative consciousness. And that just blew my mind. When we presented it to the powers that be in Pittsburgh, they said, but what is consciousness? And the other night, just last week, I got the answer to that question after about 30 years, because it was a question that occupied my thought for years and years and years. And the answer was the one I gave you, which says, the roots of consciousness reside in the evolution of the bicameral mind.
That's beautiful.
And that is the answer I should have given.
It took you 30 years to dream it up, and no, you're still
30 years to find that answer. And I think Jonas Salk would have approved.
But
Jonas,
you know,
great friend.
You know, two of our heroes, Frank Zappa and James Joyce, said all times are happening now. So it doesn't matter you dreamed it up 30 years ago. It still happened back then. It will, in 30 more years, it will still be happening. So,
oh, that's so beautiful what you're saying. And it's so
called
true.
Simultaneity. It's simultaneity, you know.
Yes.
So, go ahead.
James Joyce says it's so extraordinarily well in Finnegan's Wake. When
Dude,
he
how did
kiss but softly, me more, me till thousands see the keys to given away alone, alas, a loved. Carry me like he done, Daddy, through the toy fair. Away alone, alas, a loved, along the ... his symbol of universality and infinity. And Marshall McLuhan is the other person that I know you loved his writing, and I do too.
Well, Marshall got all his chops from the Wake. I'm amazed because I don't think we talked about the Wake 29 years ago, but I've been deep into it for 3 decades now. And
Yes.
when anybody quotes the Wake to me, I cream my jeans, dude. That was pretty heavy. And, you know, you got to give it to Frank. His first album, he lists all his influences, and he lists James Joyce as an influence.
I didn't even know that. You just enlightened me on. That's beautiful. You mean on Freak Out on Freak
On
Out.
Freak Out, the list of over 100 names of people who he was influenced by, and he said, "Don't hold it against him."
I love I love
What's
James Joyce.
yes? What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Speed of the imagination.
Yeah, that's what I like when people change and mold and like work a mandala circle on my questions.
Well,
Just
I
because
love your questions.
Yeah, just because I ask them a certain way, it doesn't mean you can't sort of throw in a little curveball. So
Yeah.
the great poet Audre Lorde said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded, said, "You can if you expose the tools." Joel, what new tool do you suggest? What new tool do you gravitate towards?
But I always gravitate towards music.
Yeah,
I serve music.
I love it. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Well, the first thing I do is, well, I think about my children, my family, also about Moon, hoping that she's well, and because she's like she's like a daughter. And I really consider her a daughter with my daughter. I consider them sisters. So I think about peace and love.
I
That's
love it.
where my energy is. And I was co-founder of a group called artistsforpeace.org, because I think the creative consciousness is a very powerful way to unite people, human beings, nations.
Yeah, all the power to your website and your organization. I was checking it out. It's important that people support that, tune into what you're doing. So you mentioned Marshall McLuhan. He learned from Ezra Pound that artists, musicians, poets, I'm just going to say artists in general, meaning all these forms,
Yes.
they're the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like. And McLuhan's main question, and I ask you, is why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though artists are broadcasting them to us?
Why do we ignore? Because we lack the inner intelligence and the open-mindedness that is needed to be the antenna for ideas that are probably on a higher level than we are because of our inner prejudices and biases. For instance, what a genius Frank Zappa was. What a genius. And the early reactions he had to his ideas, most people didn't understand what the hell he was talking about or what his music based on ideas of Schoenberg, Webern, Berg, and Varese, Boulez, Stockhausen, what that all had to do with anything. The knowledge wasn't there. The open-mindedness is often closed because of our inner prejudices and biases and bigotry. Take John Coltrane, for instance, master of masters.
Really well put, Joel. you're carrying that torch, and you've always did before Frank and after, and that's important. But you watch your documentary on the perfect circle and your composition with mandalas and not using traditional music notation and communicating this with musicians totally reminded me of Frank on the Steve Allen show when before he was a rock star in the suit and tie, he played a bicycle on Steve Allen's show as a musical composition. And he advises Steve Allen's musicians. He goes, please avoid making musical tones.
Isn't that beautiful? Well, that's a pure Dadaist response.
Yeah, but then Steve Allen goes, well, they'll have no trouble doing that.
I remember that interview so much. I've watched it many times.
Okay, Joel, do artists have moral obligations?
Absolutely.
Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I am more concerned about reactionary ideas. I'm more excited by and love new ideas. That was part of the great friendship between Frank and I, that we could discuss new ideas and music in a way that we were both very familiar with. And we were always striving to make a new piece. And to do that well, that was part of the inspiration of Varese.
Yes, indeed. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, Joel, or one of them?
Of Varese?
No, your earliest memory in your life, your personal.
Yes.
Your earliest memory ever in your personal life.
Yes, I can. And that was that. It's a very interesting one because I grew up in Pontiac, Michigan, where the Jones brothers all grew up. Thad Jones and
Elvin.
The whole Jones brothers. And what I heard was, in those days, the radio was very strong. So I always heard on the radio gospel, blues, the music of the region, which would have been Pontiac, the music that was coming from those workers in the factories, in the automobile factories. And also, my father and my sister were taking piano lessons. I remember the baby grand piano they had. And every night they would be playing, and the teacher would come over to teach them. So I remember the piano playing. Now here's an interesting thing about that. One of my greatest friends in New York was Lucia Lugoszewski. She was from Michigan, and she is one of the most extraordinary composers of the 20th century, Lucia Lugoszewski. She grew up in Wall Lake. My father was taking care of her father, and I happened to mention that grand piano, and my father said, guess who we got that piano from? It was the piano that was sold to me by Lucia Lugoszewski's father. And Lucia was really the mother of what's called the timbre piano. And John Cage called it the prepared piano. Lucia called it the timbre piano. Everything went in that piano, including the kitchen sink, and everything from the kitchen sink went in her piano.
You so mean the
piano? I was just a baby, maybe.
Yeah, but you're revealing another woman doing something before they give it credit to some white dude.
That's right. You got it. You got it. You got it.
Line him up and shoot him down. Do shop the whole bit.
Oh,
Well, we'll carry on. Then is memory, Joel, is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
is memory more? I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
It can be both.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just cleans itself of itself. If a person is in a very bad accident, for instance, they often do not remember the moment that it happened and what went on. So memory has a way of clearing its own antenna. But you use the word antenna, which I happen to love. And before he died, Jonas Salk and I were talking about cellular evolution. And we were speaking about memory, one of the most fascinating topics. And he said, you know, Joel, I believe that cells have memory. And that just was such a beautiful phrase. I mean, how else do cells gravitate to certain locations neurologically, physically?
It's multi-layered. Yeah, it's very multi-layered what you're talking about, because they call that muscle memory sometimes, but it's even deeper. What you're talking about seems to be even deeper than muscle memory.
Yes, that's what he was referring to. Yeah, I mean, that's what he was referring to when he was talking about cellular memory as opposed to other forms of memory.
So Joel, this just briefly, tell me someone in your immediate family who had an impact on you and what that impact was, like a role model, just briefly. And then outside your immediate family, someone early in your life who had an impact on you, and what specifically was that impact?
Sure. Okay, in my family, my children,
What'd
my
you get?
wives,
What did you get from your children mainly?
humor, openness, the ability to be open to all forms of collaboration, but mainly love.
What did you get from your former wives? Because you said children and former wives.
Yes.
But we got to add a little of that. What'd you get from your former wives, just briefly?
Okay. To be able to love and to go into and to examine relationship on the deepest of levels, and parenting, the whole idea of parenting through Carol Sorrell, and with the life that I shared with Carol, Melissa Craig. Then with my first wife, very deep understanding of music and spiritual development. With Carol, it was the ability to take on any task and not say, this can't be done, but the ability to say, the question is not whether or not this can be done, but how can we find a way to do this? The kind of openness. When I was collaborating with Alexander Calder, and we did Calder's Universe in New York, it was Carol that had so much to do with putting that together. with the people, and when we ran into financial quagmire, which as artists we always do, it's wherever we were born and wherever we die. But she said, Carol said, the people will do it. She always says, and that was the 60s. Yeah, the people will do it. You know, the people did it thanks to her and called her. And,
yeah, people have the power. That was
yes.
beautiful. Okay, now, Joel, I know there's a lot, but just name one early role model, early mentor in your life had an impact on you. And briefly, what was that impact outside your immediate family?
A very great impact was when I was a youngster of about 23 years, I was hired by Carlo Maria Ciolini to be principal percussionist and timpanist with the Israel Philharmonic. I was only 23. I was the youngest person in the orchestra. And at the day of the first rehearsal, I met an extraordinary composer who became mentor, composer, and deep friend. His name was A.U. Boscovich. He had an enormous influence on my work. He was the first person to accept my work and my far-outedness. And he was a great teacher and a great friend, A.U. Boscovich. And a
beautiful
composer.
That is beautiful. Joel, were you raised a particular religion?
Yes, I identify with Judaism, which is my birth religion.
Do you pray?
Do I what?
Do you pray?
Yes, I do.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
I'd like God to say, they told me you knew Frank Zappa.
No, you know this guy, he asked Bob Dobbs asked Frank from the grave, like they channeled Frank or something. You know, you don't have to believe it or not, but the question is great. He says, what does Edgar Varese think of your music? So, you know, Frank's walking down the hall in heaven and he sees Edgar Varese's door and he knocks on the door and he goes, "Hey, Edgar." Now, Edgar could probably do three things. He could go, "Get away from me, kid. You ripped me off." He could go, "Come on in. Come on in, Frank. You really cloned me well." Or he could go, "Yeah, you're pretty good, but you know, have a seat. We'll still talk."
That is so funny. And I think we all were inspired by Varese. Frank and I were inspired about the same time with the same pieces.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting because we discovered Varese at the same time.
Well, he's an important.
Louise Varese gave me the letter that Frank wrote to Varese. And what a beautiful, adoring letter that is that he wrote to Varese.
Handwritten or typed?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Was the letter from Frank to Edgar handwritten or typed?
Typed.
Typed. Wow, Frank.
Yeah, it was typed.
How cool is that? Frank using a typewriter. So, next question, Joel. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Because they also exist, they can be used as a vehicle.
Yeah, both. So how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'm going to set it up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK says, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you, Joel, advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, I would bow down and kiss the feet of Alan Watts.
That's good. That sounds like Ram Dass. He said, I'm having a real hard time loving George Bush. Like Phil,
Right.
like I'm having a real hard time loving Trump. I'm having a real hard time loving Putin. But I mean, really, what do you do? How do you advise dealing with an enemy?
Well, I would say that the quotes that you just mentioned about, I have a hard time dealing with a bastard like Putin or Trump,
Yeah.
or the rest of those lowlives. But how do I acknowledge an enemy? So I just don't ignore what they've done, but I would never forget it. And what I hated about most of Trump, I hate to even use the word. I hated to pass my lips the name Trump. But I think when it comes to discuss what brought me to dislike him, to hate him even more, was the fact that I wake up so often with such intense dislike and call it hatred for Trump, that I hated the fact that his very existence brought me into a feeling of hate. So that's why I try not to even say his name.
Yeah. No, I get it. It's like American Indians, indigenous say your enemy's your best teacher. So it's like we have to learn something about ourselves. But let's go back to James Joyce. He was the first projectionist in Dublin, his own movie theater, Volta Cinema. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
What a beautiful thing to say. Bravo. What a beautiful thing to say. I was talking to, from Artists for Peace, I was talking to Yorit Rosen, who is one of the founders of Sadhana Forest in Oroville in Pondicherry. And she said, we always try, they've planted over 200,000 trees around the world to create reforestation in devastated areas and reaquization in water reduced areas. Where agriculture has been devastated by climate change. That's Sadhana Forest. And she said a beautiful thing to answer your question directly. She said, we are always asked to teach people about trees, but the trees can teach us. Why not let the trees teach us?
Yeah.
I just think that's a beautiful. Their work has been life-saving in India, in Kenya, in Haiti. Why not let nature teach us?
It's beautiful. So beautiful. It reminds me of biomimicry, like how we can mimic, this the Messiaen just listened to the birds and he mimicked them. Sun Ra
Yeah.
and Sun Ra and Eric Dolphy said their influences were crickets.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
and so yeah, you listen to the trees, or you let the trees teach us. But it reminded me of a joke you might appreciate, and I'm glad you told me about Europe, because that is the kind of people who take action and do something, like
Yes.
plant trees. You're like, you can actually do something. But
Yes.
the joke goes like this. It reminds me of a Soupy Sales joke almost, because you know who he is. The child learns that their parent has a job, and they go to work and work a job. So they get to that age. And so the kid goes up to his dad and he goes, "So dad, what do you do for your job?" And his dad was an art teacher. And he says, "Well, I teach people how to draw." And the kid goes, "You mean they forgot?"
Well, that is so beautiful. That's why
So
it was part of our project. We have young artists for peace.
yeah. Yeah, they'll teach us something.
That'll teach us. You are so right, Jerry. That'll
Yeah.
teach us.
They'll teach us.
And they will lead us.
Yep. Well, that's why we're always working with the youth. So,
Yes.
Joel, tell me just briefly, you probably said this a million times, but you're sitting under that piano, your dad's playing piano, your sister's playing piano, but where was the tipping point in your life where you said, I'm going to make music my career, and especially more so your composing and conducting? Because you got this job at 23 in an orchestra. You're a young hotshot kid getting gigs. That's good, but where did it kick over to being composer conductor?
I can tell you the exact moment in Pontiac. They took us, they meaning the school system, took us to hear the Detroit Symphony. And I was enraptured by the sound of the basses. And at that moment, it just totally mesmerized my total being. I decided at that moment, I'm going to be a composer, I'm going to be a conductor. And when I told that to my music teachers, they said, that's wonderful. That also means that the rest of your life, from now on, you will have to devote every moment you can to music. And that's exactly what I did.
That's pre-23. What age is that? That's pre-age 23. That's like 18.
11.
Oh, age 11. You really
maybe earlier, maybe about 8 or 9. Well, 8 or 9, I started hammering around on the piano.
Yeah.
And it wasn't long before I realized that, in fact, the piano was not a way for me to express the sound that I was hearing internally. And when I discovered electronic music, and when I discovered Varese and Stockhausen, I also discovered ways of expanding my inner hearing. And that was, it didn't take, and I remember Eastman School of Music was very reactionary at that time. And one of the teachers played a piece of Webern, Opus 21, that changed my life too. And then, of course, when I went to perform in Israel, then my life was completely changed. I became totally immersed.
Yeah, you've been immersed for 8 decades, practically 80 years of being immersed. Well, we're going to get into this inner ear, but I got to tell you another funny thing because you brought up Stockhausen. You know, I'm not really into UFOs. Maybe they exist, who knows? But there's 3 people I do believe that they're probably from another planet somehow. And Stockhausen claims he is,
Yes.
Sun Ra, and then the guy from Saginaw, Michigan, Question Mark and the Mysterians. He had one hit song, 96 Tears. Those are the only 3 people I believe. Yeah, they're probably from another planet.
Yeah. Oh, and Sun Ra.
Yeah, Sun Ra, Stockhausen, and Question Mark and the Mysterians.
Yeah, right. It's so true. I used to think I always thought I was from another planet at one point.
Good. Now I'll add you to my list because I believe you. Okay, so a screenwriting teacher told me great art, great music is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're composing?
What an extraordinary question that is, because at times when I teach, I always ask my composition students, what is your intention? And my intention is to realize the vision of the piece that has opened my consciousness to realize that intention. When I was writing a piece for Steve Vai called Vibrations, in a tribute we gave to Frank at the Eastman School of Music for the 75th anniversary celebration, piece was called Vibrations for symphony orchestra and Steve and a group of wonderful rock performers. The intention appeared in a vision of a mandala. And I was, again, talking to Jonas. I said, Jonas, this vision of a mandala keeps appearing before me. And I know it's a code that I have to discover and decode. And within the next couple of nights, when my wife and I were in the country, I had to finish a couple of things. I had to finish the arrangements for Zappa's Universe, and I had to finish the music for Steve Vai. And I saw that mandala before me 24 hours a day, just like a hologram. Well, one night, very late at night, I had a vision of that hologram. And it was totally decoded. So Jonas had given me his phone number in San Diego at the Salk Institute, and he said, when this is decoded, please call me and let me know. This is the number you can reach me at the Salk Institute. And I called him and I told him that the vision had been decoded. And my intention was to put that together for Steve. I had everything but the end of the piece. I had gone back to New York, and then I was on my way back up into the country to be alone to decode the final part of the piece. And as I was pulling up to the toll booth, there was a car in front of me. At that second, I found the ending of the piece for Steve, and I hit the car in front of me.
Ah!
That guy jumped out of the car at the toll booth like one of those jokers jump out of a Jack-in-the-Box. I thought that my time was up and the guy was going to kill me. So at that moment, I decoded the piece, which was my intention to complete that piece for Steve. And the mandala was solved. And I realized that the intention was to perform that piece and complete it for Steve. At that point, I realized that we don't find, as you mentioned, my notation is in the form of mandalas because I wanted to change from conventional notation to a notation that would unite the bicameral mind, the intellect and the intuition. So I realized that we don't find the mandalas find us.
That is beautiful. They find us. Yeah, it's like bumper cars.
It's like, in fact, it was a bumper car, yeah.
Follows perfect, Joel. Follows perfect into Marcel Duchamp said, there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your audience, your listeners, when you're writing your composition?
I rarely think about the audience, but I always think about the performers. One example of that is when I did the arrangements for Zappa's Universe. Many of them are involved stories that Frank and I used to tell each other, and I knew how absolutely immersed in Weber Opus 21 he was. So when I did the arrangement for Oh No, I Don't Believe It, I did the arrangement in the exact structure, formally and pitch-wise, as Opus 21. So Oh No, I Don't Believe It runs, the way I arranged it, runs in two directions. The end of the piece starts first, and over that I've overlaid the movement of the piece. And then inside that I put a tribute to John Coltrane. And at the end, I put in various tributes to various composers like Gustav Mahler. I love Mahler, and I ended Oh No, I Don't Believe It with a Mahler-esque ending. So that's all about intent. I had intended to honor Frank with some of the composers that he loved.
That is beautiful.
There's another piece that explains that. That piece is called Outside Now Again. I thought, well, what would be interesting in terms of Frank when we do it? This was for our performance in Israel with Tommy Mars and Ike and Fowler. the gang. And I ended that with a way that I could compose the arrangement as the piece was being played. Sort of ends with, if I put one finger up, a little bit like Boulez Éclat, if I put one finger up, then group one would play that. If I put two fingers up, then group two would play that. If I put three fingers up, then group three would play that. So I started out so I could mask the forces of the orchestra as the piece evolved in performance. I thought, because when I first told Frank about, when we first discussed Zappa's universe, I said, I'm not going to arrange this like a Hollywood arranger, like an arranger. This is not going to be an arrangement, but I'm going to arrange this like a composer. So I explained to him how I was going to arrange the Oh No, I Don't Believe It, in the form of Opus 21. And I sang to him a certain idea. And it was interesting because I had been listening to Das Augenlicht just before that. And he said, oh no, that's not Opus 21, that's Das Augenlicht. I thought that was so, it just shows how incredibly well he knew the music.
He was a great listener like you. Music entails listening so much. And
you are so right.
People aren't aware of that. But let's stay on music for a second. Copeland says the four ingredients of music are melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. Now, in layperson's terms, what is tone color? We know what melody, harmony, and rhythm is pretty much. But for the layperson, what is tone color?
There are two ways to explain that. One is the fact that Scriabin had a psychological condition where you hear music as color. You hear a certain color. You hear color as sound, sound as color, and color as sound. That's one of the
synesthesia.
Synesthesia. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Synesthesia. Yes, that's it exactly. Synesthesia. So, but each instrument is like a color. Each instrument is differentiated by its sound color. A trombone does not sound like an oboe. Except in some countries, I've done a lot of work in France, and in France, the older way of, in French orchestras, you would hear trombones that sounded like bassoons. But the fact that is sound color. If you hear a clarinet, it sounds like a clarinet because of its timbral definition. You hear timpani because of its timbral definition. We call that tone color. I'm always thinking, and I believe that Frank did too, particularly when he got his electronic thing going. That's what's deeper and deeper into electronics.
Right, but timbre is the word that, people have said, well, tone color is timbre, but to the normal person who doesn't know musicology, they don't understand what timbre is. One person said timbre is the amount of overtones in a note, but I understand the comparison with color. But it was funny, you were going to say there's two ways. So you mean the two ways were Scriabin seeing
Yeah.
in hearing music, and the other way was timbre. Is that what you were saying? It was the second way?
Yes, the timbre is the second way, and synesthesia is the other way.
Right, because my friend had this theory with David Lynch's composer Balamonte, and he said, "Oh, he plays the C chord in blue. He thinks it's blue." So I went up to Frank the next day because we saw Balamonte at an art opening, and we talked to him about it. And I says, "Frank, what color is C?" And he goes, "I don't know, blue. Ask Rimsky-Korsakov."
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, yeah, because Korsakov wrote that book on orchestration.
Yeah. And Frank even says color note organ in the middle of one of his songs. But it was funny because he was like, "I don't know." That was a fun thing. Now, another friend of mine who studies music says the 3 T's of music: technique, theory, and taste. So we know technique is the hand and it's learning how to do it. Theory is the head, it's in the G of key, or it's this timbre or melody, the theory explaining the structure of music. But taste, and Dave Liebman says head, hand, and heart, the Miles Davis saxophonist, taste or heart. How does one acquire taste in music? We know you can study and learn technique and theory, but how does one acquire taste? You have a taste for Varese. The next guy might, have a taste for someone else. How does one acquire taste?
Listen, listen, listen. And or listen to Bach and eat a lot of ice cream.
What flavor?
Well, for me, chocolate.
Oh,
Every day I listen to Bach.
do you really? How
Yeah.
has Bach shaped your behavior?
I hear Bach, Stravinsky. I hear music 24 hours a day. It never stops. And it helps me clarify and structure my life. A good example, I think, Jerry, is when I first had my stroke in 1998. The doctors were saying, well, we don't know what kind of vegetable he's going to be, but he's going to be a vegetable. I was praying it wasn't going to be broccoli. So I said, look, all you have to do, I just want people I want to put on my earphone and I want to listen to Bach 24 hours a day. And that's what I did. I listened to the Bach piano works, the collected works of Bach by João Martins, the wonderful Brazilian pianist. And I just listened to that 24 hours a day. Even when I was sleeping, I had the earphones on listening to Bach, because part of what I had to do was the stroke had caused so much brain trauma that I knew I would have to, that they could tell me I was going to be a vegetable. They could tell me I would never walk again, that I would never use my arm again. And all I thought of was, like hell. And I said, we will not give up. And I said, I want to show people that if something traumatic like this happens to them, they do not have to give up. And I swore never to give up. And that is, a lot of that is the influence that Bach had on
Truly inspiring. Yeah. Your courage and bravery to carry on. It's like a Zappa quote. He said, "Don't stop and keep going."
Frank always had it. He always had the core of it. And that's what when he first told me that he had just come back from the doctors and found out that he had prostate cancer, I just said, you're going to overcome this. God damn it, you're going to overcome it. And if you don't, I'm going to come out there and strangle you. And then I called Jonas Salk. And I wanted to see what they might be doing at the Salk Institute to help. And Jonas looked into it right away. And the prognosis at that point was not good, but he did book an appointment for Frank at UCLA Hospital.
Well, let me tell you a joke really quick that Orson Bean used to tell.
Uh-huh.
The guy gets hit by a car and he's in the hospital, and the wife goes up to the doctor and says, "How is he?" And he says, "Oh, you bad news. He's going to be a vegetable for the rest of his life. You're going to have to take care of him." And the wife starts crying, and the doctor says, "Oh, I'm just fucking with you. He's dead."
Oh, God. Oh, yes.
Ruthless. But Joel, I want to go back to your word structure. I said, how did Bach shape your behavior? You said it helps you clarify and have structure. Maria Callas, the great opera singer, said, in order to be a performer, you have to have half your brain in control and half your brain in chaos. So how do you navigate that need to have the opposite, like bicameral brain again, intuition and intellect? But how do you navigate that need to be chaotic when your music, you're thinking music 24 hours a day, you're thinking structure? How do you navigate that?
First of all, I do a lot of meditation. Secondly, the damage that my stroke did to my left side made it pretty challenging to be able to turn pages of a conductor's score. So I realized, well, goddamn it, the question is not how to do it. The question is to find the way to do it. Find the way to do it. And of course, I realized, why do I need a conductor's score? Just memorize the music. So I started memorizing every score I would conduct. And that took an extraordinary focus. And therefore, every score I conduct now, I always conduct from memory.
Wow.
Before the stroke, as you know, after Zappa's Universe, I started taking Zappa's Universe, the orchestra parts, the rock musicians, 2 symphony orchestras around the country. And I also realized that there were not enough rehearsals. So I insisted in my contract that I had enough rehearsals to do Frank's music properly. But I also did it from memory, so that on one hand, I didn't have to explain it so much to the musicians. I myself was so on top of it that the musicians wouldn't have any questions. So I just committed it all to memory. Even the most difficult rhythmic orchestra parts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All of that was just completely from memory. And I knew, as from being an orchestra musician and conductor, that the clearer the conductor is, the less that one has to explain. That I would know the music better than any musician there, so that they wouldn't have to worry about it. They wouldn't have to worry about some conductor breaking down. So that's how I keep the chaos and the music all together.
Controlling chaos. Very good. Two more
Yeah.
C words, Joel. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Again, another great question. Conviction with the ability to understand someone else's view, which sometimes calls for some compromise. In order to run a global organization for peace, one has to understand the viewpoint of someone in another nation. But conviction is the first order of business. If there's no conviction, there's no progress.
You've accomplished a lot. How do you rate these three elements? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
Skill is first. Luck is second. Ambition often refers to ego, and I think that many times the ego gets in the way, particularly with conductors. Oh my God, and many musicians. The ego can be a destroyer. In the days when I first started my orchestral career, orchestras were run by egomaniacal conductors. And then I had an opportunity to work with many of them as a young kid. And Boulez did a lot to change that, because Boulez was a total professional, and he was not an egomaniac dictator. So he didn't even use a baton because he thought that was a form of dictatorship. He could express everything with his hands, and he had the skill because his ears, the three greatest ears I've ever known are Steve Vai, Frank Zappa, Pierre Boulez.
Wow, that's heavy. But you must rate up there pretty good. You got good ears, don't you?
Yes, yeah. I can hear everything.
It takes one to know one. That's pretty cool. I bet you Steve's creaming in his jeans. That's a pretty high compliment. So you anticipated, Joel, you anticipated another question. You got ESP coming in and out all over the place. Like, you know that bicameral brain, it has that thing in the middle.
Yes.
The corpus callosum.
Yes.
Yeah, you're like, that's like women know how to integrate the stuff. Men are always like one or the other, but they got their corpus callosum together, man. They're, in fact, you know what I love? Rain Man has no corpus callosum. He's like, so he can recite the phone book, but he can't tie his shoes.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, well, that.
So here's how you anticipated. Two of my film heroes say, ignore yourself. It's like their mantra. Jonas Mekas, there is no self-expression.
Did you know Jonas?
Well, no, I didn't know him, but I talked to him once or twice. But he's big because that's my main specialty is experimental films. So he's the big.
Oh, that's great, because will you join our experimental project and our film?
Sure, I'll join in.
I need more we need more experimental filmmakers. I happen to love experimental film, and I knew Jonas pretty well.
Yeah, no, we got loads of experimental film makers, but his mantra too was there is no self-expression. But the great jazz pianist Cecil Taylor, who Frank also listed in Freak Out, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. So this is a stupid question, but is art making, music making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever culture or technology is dominant?
Vehicle.
Can music making be egoless?
Good question. I believe yes, which takes spiritual discipline, but John Cage pretty much proved that yes to your answer. And incidentally, you just spoke about some of my dearest friends, Jonas Mekas, Cecil Taylor, and to that, I really want to meet and collaborate with Hiromi, who's next in line to Cecil.
Nice.
Hiromi.
Yeah.
A pianist who had exactly what you were talking about earlier. You know that when they've had a classical training. Last night I had a wonderful dream about, talking about dreams, Bill Evans and Bob Brookmeyer.
Nice. Wow.
And Bob and Bill were talking about the recording that they were doing together with both of them playing the piano, which they did after a recording session they were doing. They both sat down and they did a 2-piano recording. And I was dreaming of that last night. And I heard every note of what Bob was playing and what Bill Evans was playing. And I was anticipating the note because I realized that Bill Evans was using a pitch series and Bob had picked it up, and Bob had phenomenal ears as well. They both did. So I was saying to a friend of mine who was sitting next to me, I'm saying, this is what a genius that is. Bill Evans and Bob Brookmeyer together playing piano. And I was saying, and they're going to do these 2 notes now, and that's exactly what happened in the dream. And it was like I was totally inside the music.
Joel, we got to get your dreams hooked up to a podcast and just call it Joel's Dreams. And then, everybody can grow as musicians, because it reminded me of, Greg Ramsey, my friend. He was George Russell's assistant for 25 years.
Oh my
In
God.
fact, you would love it, because Greg was the only person who realized that Art Jarvin they mimed the Zappa piece While You Were Art at the County Museum of Art in LA. Frank just had him play the tape and they stood there and he goes, the mallet player has his mallet covers on. He was the only one that realized that. But that was a side point. But Greg's a great guy. And he said George Russell used to sit at the piano with Miles Davis, and George would hit a chord that was, just his own made up chord. Jong. And then Miles would go, check this chord out. Dang. And then George Russell would go, check this chord out. Gong.
Oh, that's great.
It's just, you don't even have to be there just to imagine these 2 guys sitting there like, sort of trying to show each other off.
That's like sitting with the Buddha.
Yeah.
Oh man, I would have loved to have heard that.
Yeah, it's like the Buddha. You go up to the Buddha and you go, what's the best question I can ask you? He goes, the one you just asked me.
Right. Isn't that true? Isn't that true?
Joel, is perception reality?
I believe that reality is perception.
Beautiful. What was the motive of the cave musicians?
The
You know,
cave musicians.
yeah, not what anthropologists say, but your hunch, your intuitive guess. What was the motive of the cave musicians?
Well, that's interesting that you should ask that, because I just am reading a book that you probably know the book, The Cave and the Shaman,
I'll look it up.
by Harder, Harder. So I'm reading this beautiful book on shamanism, and I know that within that book he addresses that question. But what was it?
But your hunch, what do you think?
To become a vehicle to merge with the alternate reality.
Was the verb to march with the alternate reality?
To merge.
Oh, merge, M-E-R-G-E.
With
Yeah.
alternate reality.
Yeah.
That comes to mind because of the hieroglyphics, the cave paintings, the artifacts of the shamanists. But I think it is a vehicle to the other reality, to the alternate reality.
But Joel, you're a curious dude. I wonder what you think, where, Harold Bloom wrote The Anxiety of Influences. So it's like, is it more the DNA from your parents that enabled you to be so expansive in your thinking of music, or did you get it on your own? I know it's both, but what's your inclination? Is it more the DNA, how your parents raised you, or on your own?
If I wouldn't have the support, if I wouldn't have had the support of my parents, I would have been unable to do certain things that I did to help my perception. But it's mostly, you asked mostly, and mostly I would say it was on my own, and having the access to explore other ideas. Like you were just talking about Stockhausen and Cage.
Yeah.
I had the access to explore other ideas, and I made it my decision to do that. And my father once asked me, would you rather be a composer or live in a shack? And I said, I'd rather live in a shack.
You say same difference, dude.
That's right, exactly. Yes, I've tried to appease him most of my life.
Yeah.
I've lived in plenty of shacks, and I still will.
It's where all the best music is. So McLuhan says this interesting little twist. He was talking with Duke Ellington.
Yeah.
And he said this line, and I'm curious your reaction. Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. Any comment?
I think that is so wise. And that's why we study world music. That's why it's extremely important for every musician to be aware of world music.
Yes.
But Duke Ellington really said it beautifully. And he certainly knew. He knew about both.
Yeah. What's an instrumental piece of music that makes you laugh?
Well, that's a great question too, because I remember as students, we always listened to the Hoffman Festival. The Hoffman Festival.
Who's the composer?
Well, there were many composers all jumbled up together.
Oh, I see.
And that became, after a while, the irony is that after a while became a serious way of working. And it was given birth by Charles Ives, by Henry Cowell, Luciano Berio, and others. And we got into this time of quoting. But I got to tell you, sometimes I hear something that even in Mozart or in Mahler and in Bach, that is so indescribably beautiful that it just fills me with a kind of joy and smiles, inner smiles. There's some people ask me, well, they said to me, what are you laughing about? Like I once told Bob Brookman and I were speaking, and he was talking about a piece that he had to do for a performance in London. And he was stuck, and he asked me, he came over and we spoke about it, and he said, how am I going to move on with this piece? I said, well, what you should do is write down what you can and then tear it up and throw it in a hat and take each piece out and paste it all together, and you'll have your piece. And he did that, and he called it Pieces of Pieces. And it is such a beautiful and wonderful work.
That's good.
That's good in Havana, but they didn't have enough musicians to put it together.
Joel, that was beautiful. That's that guy, William Burroughs had that cut up technique, same thing. And it's actually similar to what Frank invented with his words xenochrony, take two unknown pieces, put them together. It's alchemy, actually. But it reminds me of another joke for you. James Joyce was writing Finnegan's Wake, and a guy goes, well, how's it coming along? And he goes, well, I got 12 words this week. He goes, 12 words in 1 week. What's taking you so long? He goes, I'm trying to get them in the right order.
And thank God he didn't. Well, of course, in one way, whatever he did was in the right order because it turned out to be such genius.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've been reading Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people for 25 years. It's an amazing experience. So Joel, I asked for 90 minutes. Gary Titone, who got us together, said, I don't know if Joel can last that long. He goes, dude, he's flying high, but I don't want to milk it. Can you go a little longer? Or
yes, gladly.
Okay, good. Let's go longer then. So Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Yes. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
I can tell you very good because I've done many years of Feldenkrais, and I did meet Moshe.
Wow.
And I've done at least 20 years of Feldenkrais. And one of the movements when the doctors told me I would spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair, I'm only sitting in a wheelchair now because it's easy for me to roll myself up and back. I always fall off the office chairs. But a good example of Feldenkrais is that I now move my left leg, and I was told that I wouldn't have the left leg. And now, one day I was watching a guy on a train, and he was moving his left foot up and down like that. And I started mimicking what he was doing with Feldenkrais in my mind. The next thing I was moving my foot, the doctors thought I would never move my foot, and now I can move my foot. That's a pretty good example.
It's perfect.
So
really good.
Feldenkrais has been very much on my mind for 20 years. One of my friends was Moshe's chief assistant. His name was Yochanan Riveron. He wrote the first book on Moshe. So I would say, but what I'm waiting for now is to be able to get my left hand back. That's the most stubborn thing.
Yeah.
Because that's
well,
directly.
Back to Frank. Don't stop and keep going.
That's yeah. I love that.
Okay, Joel, tell me one major element in your almost 80 years of composing, one major element that stayed the same and one major element that's changed in your creative music making.
When I first started off as a little kid who could hardly sit on the piano bench, I always thought that if I pressed on the keys, I would be able to play all these pieces. What I learned is that if I play inside the piano, it's often more interesting for me as a composer. And there's a piece that people might be interested, which is called Fire Fragile Flight by Lucia Lugoszewski, which is on my recordings of Schoenberg, Crumb, Lugoszewski, and Berio. So I've learned a lot about performing inside the piano, maybe more than I've learned from playing outside on the keys.
Beautiful. Joel, if you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
I would say, keep working, working, working. And keep searching, searching, searching.
That is beautiful. Can you forget to die?
Can I forget?
To die, yes. Can
I forget to die?
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about dreaming. The other night, I had an experience of dying. Maybe it's because of all the pandemic and stuff that's been going on. I've lost so many friends in these days. And in that experience, I was lying in bed and all the lights went out, everything went out. My inner lights, the outer lights, everything went out. Except my brain was still asking the question, what was this? Is this death? And I came to the conclusion that when that switch goes off, that's death.
Wow.
Philosophically and spiritually, physically, so physical and spiritual philosophy, there are certainly many other interpretations, but in that moment, everything just went black and all the lights went on.
Wow.
And I realized that was death. And it didn't scare me. It just found it very interesting. So that's what it's like.
It's beautiful. You're a brave man. You're articulate, Joel. I appreciate it. Remind me of Paul Krasner. He said, I only believe in life after death in one of my past lives.
What did he say about his past lives?
He says, I only believe in life after death in one of my past lives.
That is a huge question. It's a beautiful question, too, because the thought often crosses my mind about past lives.
Yeah.
And when we meet people that we feel we have known in past lives and have shared experiences with, that's a beautiful experience. Paul Krasner, wonderful soul.
Yes. So here's 5 Alan Watts questions, really quick and brief, just off the top of your head in a few words.
Okay.
Who started it all?
You mean who turned on the light?
All these questions have the it in it, so you put it into the context you want. I like that. You know, first of all, Joel, you win because my series is about inventing new questions. So you answered a question with a question. That's what the Irish do. You go, you guys answer questions with questions, and they go, we do, eh?
Well, that is all of our love for James Joyce.
Yes. But who started it all? You want to answer it, or you want to leave it? That's your answer. You mean the light.
Well, at one point, I'd like to leave it this way. At one point, when I was looking for a job and things were getting desperate, and I decided, well, I've worked in the South Bronx before. I want to go into a school where I will be able to help kids at risk. And I did that. It was a high school, and I was talking to them about Socrates, about Plato. And I said to them, it's all about turning on the light, but who can turn on the light? And they said, we can.
Nice.
And that's the best way to live. Those kids who are all at risk, I mean, in the most life-threatening way.
That is a beautiful story. I love that. Okay, that was number 1. Second question from Alan Watts. Are we going to make it?
Yes.
Where do we put it?
Where?
Where do we put it?
Where do we put it? We already have the ability within us. In our consciousness.
I cut you off. Say it again. Where do we put it?
Within the very depths of our consciousness.
I like it. You're a deep guy, Joel. Who's cleaning it up?
Who's cleaning it up? Great question. Great question. First of all, in order to make it, we have to celebrate Earth. We know that Earth, I'm going from the Native American idea of Earth. So that means if we celebrate Earth, which gives us everything we have, we also have to be willing to clean up the mess that we have contributed. So who's going to clean it up? We have to clean it up. And now is the time.
And now is the time. I love it. That's Charlie Parker. Now is the time.
Yeah, and Charlie Parker is the greatest.
Charles Yardbird Parker. Okay, the last Alan Watts question. And then we're going to do a few more and we're out of here. This is amazing, Joel. I love you. The last Alan Watts question. The last Alan Watts question is it serious?
Yes.
Very good.
But it is also humorous.
Yes.
There's sometimes, aren't there, Jerry, when you just have to laugh and laugh at ourselves. I think it's a waste of time to take ourselves too seriously. And it's much more fun to laugh at ourselves.
You got to learn how to do that. Frank would sing Broken Hearts Are for Assholes, and he'd point at everybody in the audience, and then he'd point at himself.
Yes, yeah.
You're an asshole, and then he'd point at himself. So, yeah, he nailed it. Frank said, I'm very serious about being not serious.
Yes, right, exactly. Keep the humor in music.
Okay, here's a very serious question. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll? Over or under?
It depends where your ass is at the time.
I've never had that answer, Joel. You are unique. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
I guess that would be I'd open my eyes and wake up.
Oh my God, there's another great answer. Joel, tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Let's see. I'm sorry, I got to think about that.
Oh, take your time, man. Silence is golden here. You know, the gap is where the action is. You know, the funnest thing in podcast is when I say, if you need silence, go ahead and think. And everybody goes, they froze. They must have been cut off. And it's like, no, they're thinking. Just be patient.
Okay, I'd really love to come up with a funny answer to that, but I always thought I would have a wooden Chris Craft, and now I don't want it.
Yeah, but it's good. It's something that you never had and you never want. Yeah, but now you want it. Well, but you know, I'll tell you the three answers I get the most, unless you want to think about it.
I would love to hear them.
Fame, money, and heroin.
All three. I would go with all three.
Well, I mean,
Those are really good answers.
yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. It actually comes out of neuro-linguistic programming. I just sort of hijacked it from them. That's right. I mean, I hijacked all these questions from other people. So
That's wonderful.
now this one is back to Frank, and I'm curious because I think how Frank shaped my behavior is that he taught me about embracing contradiction. So, you know, he said, you got to love the cops as they beat the shit out of you on the street. You know, it's funny, but it is true.
Yeah,
And then,
that's true.
you know, he's very Zen when he goes, nothing is what I want. A true Zen saying. I mean, nothing is what I want is such a contradiction in terms and thinking, especially from a guy who's an Italian macho dude, you know. And so he resonates with these people. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve.
Always the wisdom.
Yeah, and that's Frank all the time. He's always like cutting down the church or satirizing the church, but he was raised Roman Catholic and it was a big part of his life. And as much as he said he checked out, he held on to it. And then Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist.
I love that.
But here's the question. Here's the question, Joel. What you resist persists. There's a saying that goes, you create what you resist. And Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into you are what you hate. So I'm not saying you, Joel, but just this idea. One creates what one resists. You create what you resist. Any thoughts on that saying?
God, don't let me be a Republican.
That's a good one.
I was thinking about the answer to your other question, and I now have an answer.
Go ahead.
Okay, so my answer is, I think at the end of our lives, there is absolutely nothing, and we become part of the holy nothingness.
Oh, God.
So in a way, it's much ado about nothing. I embrace nothingness.
Much ado about nothing.
Yes. Nothingness, like silence, is holy to me.
Yeah. Wow, that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, nothing is what I want. Nothingness is so important. It's almost like we're trying to get back to the void, or the McLuhan said the gap is where the action is. Like tactility isn't one hand touching the other hand. Tactility is the space in between.
Yes.
And that Henry Moore, the sculptor, he was more sculpting the space, the open space, than Cage, Cage's 433, it charted on the English pop charts about 10 years ago.
It did. That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
No, I know a guy you love too, probably. Thelonious Monk said, silence is the loudest sound in the universe.
And I think the most beautiful too.
Yeah. Well, my friend said Monk heard all the notes Charlie Parker heard, but only decided to play some of them.
Yes, that was Monk's genius. That is so right. That is so right. Oh, what a beautiful friend
Yeah, that's I'll even name him. That's Doug O. Smith. He's the most amazing artist I've ever met in Venice, California. He's a cross between Charles Yardbird Parker, R. Crumb, Salvador Dali, and Lenny Bruce. And he paints on the street. He's a street artist. Amazing.
Can we get him to? Can we get a way to invite him to present on artistsforpeace.org?
I will definitely, next time I see him, I'll say, Dougo, they want you in New York. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
he's quite an amazing human being. Okay, we got 3 more questions. We're out of here, Joel. I want this to last forever.
Let's show your friend's work globally.
Oh, yeah.
And your films.
We got a ton of films and art to show you. Yes, we will love to participate. You are a hub of creative sharing. It's all about sharing.
It's all about sharing.
Yeah, but how you ever got inside? Well, no, I can't ask 3. I left one out, so you got a bonus. A poet said that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Your inner dialogue is what is created within the evolution of the bicameral mind. The roots of consciousness.
But what language is Joel's inner dialogue in? You said how it was created, but if you had to describe it.
My inner dialogue is constantly and infinitely about music. Now, my music uses space as the instrument. Space is the instrument that I use to retrieve my sound from. If you get a chance to listen to Celestial Visions, you'll see what I mean.
I look forward to it.
My inner dialogue has all to do with music and with expansion of consciousness.
Yeah, I will check that out and I appreciate it. But there's something you have in your life, who Joel is, that you learn to tap into McLuhan called it the interior landscape.
The what part of the interior landscape?
The way you tap it, you've tapped into the interior landscape. Like there's the inner and the outer. And then humans invent language and they outed their inner. That's the poetry is outing your inner dialogue. Well, before we had dialogue, we grunted or, gestured. But as soon as they invented words, they said, oh, you were born or you died. Well, they didn't know what birth was. They didn't know what caused birth. So when humans first existed, the baby would pop out and they wouldn't go, well, that was something I did 9 months ago with somebody in the other cave. So we'll use that word. That's a baby and you gave birth to a baby. It just happened. So, they weren't separating the inner from the outer. They might look at the moon and they go, the moon caused that baby to come out of your body. They didn't have they weren't cluttered with science.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
In notation, they didn't go,
yeah,
what key is this song in? They would say, it's in the G of key.
That's like the skeleton key to James Joyce.
Yeah, skeleton key. Okay, here we go. Thornton Wilder, big Wakean dude, 1928. Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. Joel, you laid your cards on the table for 2 hours. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
In the words of my dear friend Anna Sokolov said, art is the search for truth.
Yes.
You work, and then you keep working until you die. But art is the search for truth. And Anna Sokolov was a great fighter for truth.
I love it. That was beautiful, Joel. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
What I see is the desire for the ability to evolve one's consciousness on a higher spiritual level. That I find very inspiring. And I am very inspired by the work of young artists, by children, and the spirit of creativity that is taking hold in the world today.
Yeah, and you're nurturing it. That's the beautiful thing.
Oh, thank you so much, Jerry. I just hope so. I just hope I can, because sharing is what it's all about.
Yeah, you don't have to hope, dude. You're doing it. You're doing the real deal. In fact, a bonus joke and compliment. You know, Marshall McLuhan's one of his favorite jokes is the priest is trying to cross the Canadian border, and the custom officer, you know, takes his flask and he says, "Hey, what's in that flask?" And he says, "That's water." And the customer officer takes a swig and he goes, "That's whiskey." And the priest goes, "It's a miracle."
Oh, that's priceless. Oh, I love that.
Yeah, but it's a lead up to, McLuhan said, communication of the new is a miracle, but it's not impossible. So you've proved we communicated. Well, you communicated a lot of newness to me, and that's what I love. I need new. I need to, you know, shake things up and not get passive and laid back. I like your punchy newness, you know.
Well, count me in on your team.
Hey, we're the same team.
Yes, we're the same team, but I love the way you just put it.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a bonus, another McLuhan favorite joke. Two caterpillars are on a branch and a butterfly flies by. And one caterpillar says to the other caterpillar, "You'll never get me up in one of them contraptions."
I didn't realize that McLuhan had all these jokes. I'm so glad to hear this.
Oh, well, then you get a bonus third one. His favorite joke and Alfred Hitchcock.
Huh?
Alfred Hitchcock loved this joke too. And it's two goats are eating film coming out of a film can, you know, in the back lot over here in Culver City. They're chewing on film. And one goat turns to the other and goes, "The book was better."
Oh God, oh my God, Jared, that's the best one yet.
Yeah, it's too bad Frank and Marshall couldn't have sit around and told funny jokes, but this has really been fun, Joel. The last question is, and I don't want it to end, but what gives you the most optimism?
speaking with you today.
Well, it's reciprocal. So we'll just talk for another 10 hours and then Gary Tatone will be going, Joel will only last a couple hours. I go 10 hours later. We're still talking and telling jokes.
I would love that. I would love that, Jerry.
No, we'll tune in again. Joel, this has been so fun. I can't believe that it was 29 years ago. You invited us to your really highbrow fancy party, after Zappa's Universe. I felt so honored to go to like a fancy Manhattan party. And boy, that was a special treat. But, it's preserved on film to watch Zappa's Universe or to listen to it. And it's really a remarkable thing you did, besides a million other things like Satie, Calder. It's endless what you've done.
Oh, thank you, Michael. One of the most wonderful opportunities I've had is to have this opportunity to speak with you.
Thanks, Joel.
And I thank you for the joy of that. And my God, the jokes just are incredible. But
well, I've got to do one bonus thing. I got to grab this book and ask if you know about it. Hold on 1 second.
Okay, got it.
I hang out with a lot of street musicians in Venice. We've really got an amazing thing where people can play music on the street. Well, you have it in New York too.
Well, one
of my friends loves this book, Herman Helmholtz, on the sensations of tone.
I would love to. I'm going to get that.
Do you know this book?
This is the first time I've seen it. I'm sorry to say, but I'm so happy.
I wonder if Frank ever saw it or Perez, because the thing is that it was written in just way back 90 years after its publication. So it was written in 54. And it's just like a greatest scientific classic, the gap between natural science and music theory.
That is wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm going to order that tonight.
And how about Nikki Solonymski? Did you know Nicholas?
Yeah, I met Nikki. And what a great spirit and what a great human being Solonymski was. You had mentioned LACMA before. Well, Solonymski was that's the last time I saw Solonymski was at LACMA.
Yeah.
And what a great inspiration and what a great soul he was.
Oh, I saw Ahmet and Dweezil play at the Whiskey, and we're sitting up in the fancy seats, and next to me is Frank, and next to him is Nicholas Solonymski.
Yeah, and Frank loves Solonymski.
Yeah, and they're playing loud rock and roll, and it's like it was surreal to sit there with them watching,
loud. Really love Frank, yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, we could yap on and on. Thank you, Joel. Thanks for everything you do. It's amazing that you spent this time with me. It really meant a lot to me.
It meant a lot to me, Jerry, and I'm just sorry it's ending so soon. We got to keep it going.
We'll keep it going forever, Joel. Thank you again. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but it doesn't mean it's going to end. I'll see you in my dreams, brother.
And I'll see you in mine, brother. And I look forward to seeing you. Do you get to New York ever?
I will come by, definitely.
Great. Please do. And I want you as part of our film committee, our part of our film project.
I'm going to start sending you films up the yin yang. And when you get out here to Venice, California, we're going to start a street act in Venice Boardwalk.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Bye, Joel.
My dear friend, I love you.
Love you, Joe. Bye.